Well, it was revealed this week that free speech is now a thing of the past in 90% of British universities, because the current generation of students, Generation Snowflake as it's become known, is so intellectually fragile that many of them can't hear an opposing argument without dissolving in a puddle of traumatized feelings, and they need to take refuge in what they call safe spaces, places they say are designed to promote inclusiveness by, you've guessed it, excluding people. Specifically anyone with an unwelcome opinion, which may have a toxic effect on the vulnerable occupants of these safe spaces and trigger them by reminding them of things that have happened in the past that make them sad. In other words, these are people who've been intellectually disenfranchised by their own heightened sense of specialness, but I'm sure it's nothing a good slap around the face with a wet fish couldn't cure. Now, of course, stupidity is often self-indulgent, and herein lies a clue as to why this is happening. It's no accident that much of this poor me activism has coincided with universities dumbing down, because dumbing down is good for business. The more they can offer useless vanity degree courses to people who don't belong anywhere near a university, the more money they make. Especially agenda-driven social justice courses that leave you dumber than you were before you started them, and that naturally attract the kind of people who are not there to broaden their knowledge, but to have some imagined victim status validated and reinforced. People who've been persuaded that their pathetic personal hang-ups have academic value and who are stupid and vain enough to actually believe it. People who didn't have the grades for the University of Life and who are too inadequate or dull to study something real like science or medicine or engineering, so they settle for a degree in gender studies or cultural studies or social justice and peace studies or some other load of wanky, subjective, bollock-brained nonsense that adds nothing at all to the body of human knowledge. Education as masturbation. Now there's a subject for a PhD. In the past, when I've talked about the problems at university, I've been told that I have no right to an opinion on the subject because I didn't go to university, so I don't know what I'm talking about. Well, I didn't need to become a priest either to know that religion is bollocks and gender studies is uber bollocks. Besides, I do have a master's degree in equality and fairness studies. You didn't know about that, did you? And a PhD in cultural histrionics from the University of Diversity, Cloud Cuckoo Land campus. It's entirely imaginary, of course, but it's still worth more than a Mickey Mouse degree in gender studies. So if you're doing a gender studies degree, you might want to save your blushes now and step up to something a bit more useful, like puppetry perhaps, or basket weaving. Give yourself a chance in life. A degree in gender studies will make you even more unemployable than you would be with no degree at all, because it tells a potential employer that you are likelier than not to be an agenda-driven troublemaker at heart who has spent years cocooned in a self-induced bubble of phony victimhood, immersed in a subject you knew in advance was going to be useless. Thank you for your interest. We'll let you know. Of course, there's always academia, and it says nothing good about academia that that's the only place your poxy degree is likely to carry any weight. So maybe you'll become a university lecturer and help to miseducate another generation of entitlement junkies and feelings jockeys to believe that they somehow deserve to be compensated for their useless, pampered existence. Or maybe you'll get a job in a bar. Who knows? When you fill a university with social justice warriors who know nothing about life, yet who feel inclined to impose an agenda on everyone else, they will naturally gravitate towards running the student union, because then they can decide who gets to speak and who gets no platformed and shouted down. And that's why whenever a student union makes a public fool of itself with some crass act of censorship, its public face is often some strident faux feminist man-hater and or ethnic minority racist with a raft of imaginary grievances and a massive chip on their shoulder. I'd be curious to know how many of the people who run student unions are studying, say, chemistry or mathematics, and how many are enrolled in agenda-driven bullshit studies. It might be relevant. Anyway, now that the morons are actually in the universities dragging everyone down to their level, we need to do something about this safe space nonsense, because the fertility of our culture depends on universities germinating ideas, not exterminating them, and this generation of self-absorbed crybabies has no right to come along and salt the earth for everyone. Now, to those of us outside university in the common sense world, the answer here is pretty obvious. What's needed are a few robust safe space invasions, preferably by drunken rugby teams mooning at everyone and laying about them with wet fish, or socks full of cold rice pudding, whichever happens to be handy, saying the unsayable from the childish to the offensive until everyone there is all triggered up and vulnerable, traumatized to within an inch of their privilege, bombarded with gender-specific pronouns and buried under an avalanche of microaggressions until they dissolve in a slurry of liquidized feelings and boo-hoo poor me's. That would be the ideal scenario. However, more realistically, given that many universities now feel the need to offer remedial literacy and numeracy courses to first-year students emerging from what passes for an education system, it might be useful also if, before they officially commenced their studies, all students were required to get in touch with their inner child and give it a good clip round the ear. It would save an awful lot of trouble later on, not to mention considerable personal embarrassment when they finally grow up. If, like me, you want to live in a world where men and women are completely equal, not just in theory, but in actual practice, then you'd better get used to being called a racist by women who call themselves feminists. Progressive feminists, to be precise, or third-wave feminists, as they're sometimes known. Now, personally, I'm happy to be called any number of ugly names if it helps to draw attention in some small way to the glaring fact that progressive feminists are traitors to their gender. It's entirely thanks to their poisonous influence that when it comes to Islam, the words feminist and hypocrite go together as seamlessly as the words dickless and jihad. Can I say that? I ask because I read recently that a notorious group of hardline progressive feminist nutcases has been enlisted to help censor social media and crack down on free speech that hurts people's feelings. So I'd better be careful what I say here, otherwise... Wait, did I hear a click? Am I still here? Let's keep our fingers crossed and plough on. Now, everyone knows that feminism has been morally bankrupted by the cowardly refusal of the ones with the biggest mouths, the progressive feminists, to confront the greatest threat to women in the world today, Muslim misogyny. I'll say it again for you girls who still have your fingers in your ears, that's Muslim misogyny. We all know you want to ignore it, you couldn't have made that any more obvious. But it would be nice if just once in a while you could say something critical about it, just to reassure us that you're not quite the totally unprincipled, self-obsessed hypocrites we all think you are. No offence. Seems like the only time progressive feminists make any noise about Muslim misogyny is when they're shouting people down and calling them racists for opposing it. But then progressive feminists are not real feminists. And yes, there are still some of them around. It's just that their voices aren't heard so much because they tend to tell the unpleasant truth about Islamic immigration and its consequences for women, and nobody wants to hear about any of that, so it's fingers in ears, racist, racist, all men are rapists, tra-la-la-la. One thing progressive feminists love is to challenge the patriarchy. As long as it's not the Muslim patriarchy that treats women as actual possessions, mustn't challenge that one or you'll be a racist. And if anyone else challenges it, you should call them a racist and a misogynist if they answer back and you think you can get away with it. As long as it's not a Muslim man, of course. Muslim men can't be misogynist or racist, as that would be racist. You see, Muslim men are at the top of the progressive feelings hierarchy of unreasonable, oversensitive people who must always be agreed with and never offended, especially the ones with the great big unhygienic bushy beards. They're right at the top of the pile, those boys. They even outrank loud-mouthed black lesbians, if you can believe it. So of course this means that the number one rule of progressive feminism is that you never draw any kind of attention to the plight of women in the Muslim world being abused and persecuted every day by Muslim men, being forcibly married, being punished for being raped. Oh, and whatever you do, don't mention the 1,000 women a year in Pakistan who are murdered by members of their own family. If you do, you'll be a far-right racist. You'll be excluded from the progressive bubble. The dinner party invitations will quickly dry up, and then you might as well kill yourself. If you don't mind me saying so. The progressive sellout to Islamic misogyny is so total, we're witnessing the death of feminism. There's now such a complete lack of credibility. Nobody takes it seriously anymore. Feminism is now seen merely as a playpen for crybabies and bullies, censorious, small-minded, safe space harpies who hate being women and who want everyone else to compensate them for it. And they're such incorrigible whores to Islam, especially to Muslim men. They defer to them so eagerly on women's rights, it's as if they have an unhealthy desire to be dominated by Muslim men. I'm not saying they're attracted to them necessarily, they probably despise them as much as they despise all men. But of course, being progressives, they despise themselves even more for being so racist about it, and subconsciously they want to be punished. It's the only explanation for their behaviour that makes any sense. So presumably for them, an Islamic invasion of Europe couldn't have come at a better time. Because nobody knows how to punish a woman like a third world Muslim man, surely the most inadequate human creature on this planet, with all due respect. Raised by his mother to have no regard for women and too stupid and selfish to know any better, his horizon begins at the end of his penis where his brain resides. Of course, I'm not saying that they're all like that. I wouldn't want to be some kind of racist. I'm sure it's just a few bad apples imported wholesale from bad apple land, the land of rape culture. And millions more bad apples are on their way, you lucky ladies. Who's going to stop them? The Greeks? And soon, when Europe is flooded from top to bottom with third world Muslim bad apples, doing what they do best, making themselves thoroughly unwelcome, then progressive feminists with their refugees welcome signs will find out the hard way, when it's too late, that what they wished for is not what they want. And when women's safety and freedom in Europe eventually become so constricted that they are effectively relegated back to the shadows, it'll be very unfortunate, but what can we do? If third world Muslim men insist that uncovered women are asking to be molested, and they do, who's going to argue with them? Only a racist, surely, or a far-right hate-monger. Certainly not a progressive feminist. She knows her place.
When you're in your history class and see old pale dudes on the board, privilege! See a label made in China, oh that's easy to ignore. Privilege! Oh, privilege, we've learned to ignore it. Our invisible knapsack is where we store it. Privilege, though many folks have fought it. If you're white, male, or hetero, you probably got it.